In today's story, we descend into darkness. Not metaphorical darkness, real darkness. The kind that presses against your skin. The kind that steals sound. The kind that does not forgive mistakes. 2 separate caving incidents. 2 moments where adventure turned into terror. And both remind us of something simple. The human body was never meant to be folded, twisted, and trapped inside the earth. Viewer discretion is advised. December 27, 2003. 8 boys from the San Antonio Boy Village set out for an afternoon adventure at Boy Scout Cave in Florida. 2 counselors accompanied them. Among the group were Michael Shuro, 15, and Javik Henderson, 16, confident, energetic, eager to prove themselves in the winding depths below. Boy Scout Cave had a reputation. It wasn't unstable. It wasn't prone to collapse. It was dry, structurally sound, considered safe. But it was tight, infamously tight. Narrow crawls, sharp turns, passages that forced you to breathe shallow and move slowly. The counselors made a decision before entering. They would stay outside. They cited their size. The passages would be too restrictive for them. The boys would explore alone. Just 9 flashlights between them. Shortly after noon, they began their descent. The temperature dropped as they moved deeper, settling into a constant 72 degrees. Not cold, not warm, just still, unmoving air, heavy. The counselor who remained at the entrance built a small campfire to stay warm. A harmless decision. At least, it seemed that way. Inside, the boys pushed forward. Michael and Henderson took the lead. The cave swallowed sound. Their breathing echoed louder than their voices. Every movement scraped against limestone walls that seemed to lean closer the deeper they went. The further they crawled, the more the darkness felt physical, like pressure on their backs. An hour in, they reached it. The hairpin curve. The name alone made some of them uneasy. It was a natural bottleneck, a narrow horizontal slit in the rock, just wide enough for one person at a time. The passage bent sharply, nearly 180 degrees, forming a blind corner that hid whatever waited beyond it. The limestone walls were rough and damp. The ceiling pressed low. The floor uneven, littered with small stones and debris. To pass through, you didn't walk. You folded. Michael went first. He exhaled deeply and wriggled forward, inch by inch, shoulders scraping rock, hips twisting unnaturally to follow the curve. He made it through. Henderson followed closely behind, but the bend was sharper than expected. The space narrower. He twisted his torso, turned his hips, pressed one shoulder down and the other upward. Then, he stopped. He tried to inhale. The rock pressed against his ribs. He tried to push forward. Nothing. He tried to pull back. Nothing. He was locked in place. His body contorted at an angle it was never meant to hold. His breathing quickened. Panic rose. "I'm stuck," he whispered at first. Then louder. "I'm stuck." Quote. Michael heard it immediately. He turned in the cramped darkness, scraping his elbows and knees, and began crawling back toward Henderson. Behind them, the rest of the group waited in a slightly wider chamber. Their nervous chatter bounced off stone walls. They couldn't see what was happening. They could only hear the shift in tone. Michael wedged himself beside Henderson, pressing into the same impossibly tight space. The limestone tore at their clothes, scraped their skin. Henderson tried again to move. Forward, backward, nothing. The cave had him, and it wasn't letting go. The scraping grew louder. Skin against limestone, fabric tearing, breathing turning ragged. The cave that had once been silent now echoed with panic, muffled shouts, frantic exhales, the dull thud of bodies pressing against stone. Michael braced his feet against one wall and pulled. Nothing. He pushed against Henderson's hips. Nothing. The space was too tight, too twisted. Henderson's body was bent at a cruel angle, ribs compressed, hips wedged, one shoulder pinned higher than the other. Every attempt to move sent sharp edges digging deeper into bone. It felt as though the cave itself was tightening around him, crushing him slowly. Minutes passed, then more. Time lost meaning inside that narrow slit of rock. Michael kept fighting, pushing, pulling, shifting his own body into painful positions just to gain leverage. But the confined space drained energy fast. Every movement required 10 times the effort. Despite the steady 72-degree temperature, their bodies were losing heat. They weren't moving enough. Cold limestone wicked warmth from their skin. Their muscles began to tremble. Henderson's breathing grew shallow. Michael's hands started shaking. Then something changed. Michael's vision blurred. His arms felt heavy. He tried one more time to pull. And suddenly, without warning, he slumped forward. Unconscious. His body sagged against the narrow rock walls, half draped across Henderson. For a second, Henderson couldn't process what had happened. Then it hit him. Michael. No response. Panic exploded in his chest. He couldn't move, couldn't turn, couldn't even reach his friend properly. All he could do was shout. His voice ricocheted down the tunnel, thin and distorted. In the wider chamber behind them, the other boys froze. Then chaos. Flashlights jerked wildly, beams bouncing off jagged stone. Batteries flickered, light, dimming at the worst possible moment. What's happening? Is he okay? Can they move? No one knew. The air suddenly felt thick, heavy, oppressive. Whispers spread quickly among them. The fire outside. Was it burning oxygen? Was the air running out? Panic doesn't need facts. It feeds on fear. And fear was everywhere. Some of the boys became convinced they were running out of breathable air. That at any moment, the cave would turn into a suffocating tomb. They were kids, and they were in over their heads. No one wanted to leave. No one wanted to abandon Michael and Henderson. But they couldn't free them. And if they stayed, they might all get trapped. The decision felt impossible, but it had to be made. They would go for help. They would come back. One by one, they turned and began crawling toward the entrance, leaving behind the sound of Henderson's distant shouting. Above ground, the counselors had no idea what was unfolding below them. When the boys burst from the cave entrance, pale, shaking, breathless, their words tumbled over each other. He's stuck. Quote. Michael passed out. Quote. We can't move him. Quote. The counselors' faces drained of color. The campfire was extinguished immediately, boots grinding embers into dirt. One counselor dialed 911 with trembling hands. The other knelt with the boys, trying to steady them, though his own composure was fraying. Within an hour, rescue teams arrived. Experienced cavers, fire and rescue personnel, equipment loaded onto stretchers. They knew Boy Scout Cave's reputation. Tight, unforgiving, but navigating it with gear, oxygen tanks, medical kits, extraction tools, would make it even worse. And now there was another concern. Reports of possible oxygen depletion. Inside the cave, Henderson was still trapped. Michael was unconscious. And time was running thin. The rescuers found the boys huddled near the entrance. Pale faces, red eyes, trembling hands still clutching flashlights. The air felt thick, not from lack of oxygen, but from fear. The imagined suffocation had spread like wildfire through young minds trapped in the dark. Rescue leaders quickly assessed the environment. Meters were brought in, readings taken, calm voices cutting through panic. The oxygen levels were normal, safe, stable. There was no toxic buildup, no invisible killer in the air. The threat had been psychological, fear feeding fear until it felt real enough to choke on. Relief rippled through the group. But it was brief, because two boys were still inside, and they were running out of time. The rescue team entered the cave with minimal equipment, harnesses, chisels, medical kits. The passages were too narrow for bulky gear. Everything had to be carried by hand. Every inch forward required effort. Knees scraping, helmets brushing stone, breathing echoing off tight walls. They followed the route the boys had described. Deeper, narrower, darker. When they reached the hairpin curve, the sight was sobering. Henderson was still conscious, but barely. His skin was pale and damp. His body trembled uncontrollably. His lips had turned faintly blue. Michael lay ahead of him, slumped forward, completely unresponsive. His breathing was shallow, irregular. Hypothermia had set in. 72 degrees sounds mild, but pressed against cold limestone for hours, unable to move, bodies lose heat fast. Faster than people expect. The rescuers worked carefully. They assessed first. No rushing. No reckless pulling. They began chiseling away at the rock, widening the bottleneck by fractions of inches. Each strike echoed sharply through the cave. Metal on limestone. Slow, deliberate, painstaking. The rescuers themselves had to contort their bodies into impossible angles, mirroring the same twisted positions that had trapped the boys. It took over an hour. Finally, the rock gave enough. Henderson was eased backward, inch by inch, until he was free. The moment his body cleared the passage, he let out a sob, raw, exhausted, disbelieving. But he couldn't stand. His muscles were stiff, his body shaking violently. They wrapped him immediately in a thermal blanket and began the long crawl back toward daylight. There was no time to celebrate. Michael was still trapped, still unconscious. The rescuers returned to the curve. Now the urgency was sharper. Every minute mattered. They chiseled again, harder, faster, but still controlled. Sweat mixed with limestone dust. Arms burned from effort. After nearly 2 hours of widening, adjusting, repositioning, Michael was freed. His skin was cold to the touch. His pulse weak, but there, present. They secured him in a harness, carefully maneuvering him through the tight labyrinth. Every movement was slow, calculated. The rescuers' bodies ached, knees bruised, shoulders scraped raw, but they kept moving. And finally, light, fresh air. The cave mouth widened above them. They emerged into daylight. Emergency medical teams were waiting. Blankets, IV fluids, warmed oxygen. Michael and Henderson were rushed to the hospital immediately. Both were severely hypothermic. Michael remained unconscious for nearly a full day before finally waking. But he did wake. They both survived. In the aftermath, one truth stood out. The counselors had stayed outside with good intentions. But good intentions don't replace guidance, or preparation, or equipment. A routine exploration had nearly become a tragedy, not because the cave collapsed, not because oxygen ran out, but because tight spaces, fear, and underestimation are a dangerous combination. And that was only the first story. The next one involves someone far more experienced. A seasoned caver, someone who knew the risks, and still found himself in a position he never imagined. Trapped in darkness, with no easy way out. February 11, 1998. Morning air cut sharp through the Tennessee woods. Frost clung to fallen leaves. Breath hung visible in the cold. James Lewis, Alan England, Darrell Moore, and Jerry Olson stood at the edge of something new. Olson had discovered it weeks earlier while ridge walking, a slit in the earth barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Locals called it Weatherly Well. It didn't look like much from the surface. Just a narrow scar in the ground. 9 inches wide, 4 feet down, barely enough space for one person at a time. Beyond that first constriction was an 11-foot drop into a larger passage. And then another 10-foot descent deeper still. The entrance alone felt like a warning. The slot was damp, cold, claustrophobic even from above. From where they stood, they could peer into the first drop, a steep descent swallowed by shadow. The passage below twisted like a corkscrew, tight and unforgiving, offering little margin for error. These were not amateurs. They had years of experience between them. But experience does not widen rock. And it does not soften stone. They laid out their ropes carefully. Checked knots. Double-checked handlines. The slot would allow only one person through at a time. Alan England volunteered. At 63 years old, he was the oldest of the group, but also the smallest, lean and remarkably fit. If anyone could slip through that gap, it was him. They secured a rope above ground to serve as a handline. England stood at the opening and took a slow breath. 9 inches. That was all the earth was offering. He lowered himself carefully, turning sideways, compressing his ribs as he eased into the slit. Stone pressed against his chest and spine simultaneously. There was no room to adjust once committed. Every inch downward required deliberate control. His shirt snagged. His pant leg dragged across damp limestone. Moisture soaked into fabric immediately. Cold seeped through layers. He exhaled slowly to reduce his chest width, allowing gravity to pull him lower. The rock did not yield. It scraped, resisted, tested him. Finally, he slipped through the slot. The first 4 feet gave way to the 11-foot drop below. Gravity now worked in his favor. With the rope steady in his hands, he lowered himself into the chamber. His boots touched stone. For the first time since entering, he could straighten slightly. Not comfortably, but enough. He stretched his cramped shoulders. rolled his neck. His headlamp cut through the darkness, revealing the next section, another 10-foot drop, leading deeper into twisting passages that vanished into black. The cave felt alive in its silence. Still, waiting. England paused. He could go further. He wanted to. But he was alone. The next drop would require additional rope work. If something went wrong, there would be no one below to help. Experience teaches restraint. Reluctantly, he decided to turn back. His clothes were already damp. The chill was settling into his bones. No reason to push luck. Climbing the 11-foot section was manageable. Hands steady on the rope. Boots searching for footholds. Muscle memory guiding each movement. He reached the base of the slot, the same narrow opening he had slipped through earlier. Only now, he was looking up at it. From below, the gap appeared smaller. More severe. What gravity had assisted during descent would now work against him. He positioned himself carefully, turned sideways, raised one arm upward into the slit, and began to climb. He pulled on the rope and began the climb. At first, it felt manageable, controlled, familiar. But the moment his shoulders reached the slot, everything changed. The rock closed in around him. What had seemed tight before now felt impossibly narrow. His progress stopped, completely. The stone pressed into his ribs and spine, pinning him mid-movement. There was no room to shift his hips, no space to angle his shoulders. Gravity, which had so generously assisted his descent, now dragged him backward. He twisted, pulled, exhaled deeply to compress his chest. Nothing. The slot felt smaller than before. Crueler. His soaked clothing clung to him like a second skin, heavy and cold, making every inch of movement harder than the last. Above, Lewis and Moore saw the struggle. They pulled on the rope, trying to give him leverage. But leverage requires space, and there was none. Each tug only drove him tighter into the stone. The cave tightened its grip. Minutes stretched. His arms trembled. Cold crept deeper into his muscles. Winter air from the entrance poured down the shaft, turning the already low cave temperature into a weapon. Moisture in his clothes leached heat from his body. His teeth began to chatter uncontrollably. Breathing became difficult. The narrow slot restricted his chest, limiting each inhale. Shallow gasps. Short. Panicked. He wasn't just stuck. He was being squeezed. Lewis and Olsen lowered extra clothing. A thermos of something warm. England forced himself to drink, swallowing against the cold that seemed to be settling inside his bones. But warmth fades quickly in stone. Time passed. Too much of it. And then he said the words no one wants to hear. I can't do this anymore. Quote. His voice echoed hollowly upward. Go get help. Quote. There was no hesitation. Lewis and Olsen scrambled out of the woods, hiking fast toward Olsen's house. Calls were made to the East Tennessee Cave Rescue Team. Within 2 hours, headlights cut through the winter trees. Rescuers arrived, seasoned cavers carrying specialized equipment, calm in ways only experience allows. By the time they reached England, he had been trapped nearly 5 hours. 5 hours pinned in stone. His skin was pale, lips faintly blue, body shaking violently. The pain radiating through his chest and shoulders was unlike anything he had known. His mind replayed the descent, how easily gravity had carried him down. How simple it had felt. He had not respected the climb out. The rescuers assessed quickly. More layers, more warm fluids, steady conversation to keep him alert. The slot itself was the real challenge. Its geometry left almost no working space. They rigged a complex hauling system, pulleys, directional anchors, carefully tensioned lines. Every angle mattered. Too much force could injure him. Too little would accomplish nothing. Each pull was deliberate, slow, measured in inches. England gritted his teeth as the limestone scraped across his chest and shoulders. The rock felt alive against him, unyielding, indifferent. The rescuers communicated in quiet, controlled tones. No panic, only precision. An hour passed in painstaking effort. And then, movement, real movement. His shoulders cleared the tightest point. Air seemed to rush into his lungs more fully. Another pull, another inch, and suddenly, he was free. They eased him onto the forest floor. The cold outside felt different than the cave's suffocating chill. Open, breathable, he stood shakily, legs unsteady but determined. Despite exhaustion, despite hypothermia creeping through him, he insisted on walking back to the car under his own power. A quiet act of resilience. Later, reflecting on the ordeal, England admitted what few experienced cavers openly confess. He had underestimated the exit. The tight confines had rendered his ascenders nearly useless. Skill and experience do not override geometry. And gravity, once your ally, can become your greatest adversary.